Hello, how is everybody? We are working on module one. Now, my my talks through each module are going to be kind of at a higher, at a upper level. So I'm not going to I don't usually get into the minutia of the PowerPoints. We can wade, because they inadvertently become boring. So I'm going to try to give you an overview, and we're going to go through the PowerPoints and talk about some of the more, theoretic. It's more theory, not well, kind of theory, but overall top level knowledge that you're going to need that is not necessarily presented to you from your book. That's kind of the direction I'm going. And we will use the PowerPoints as a guideline as we discuss kind of the overview of working with databases and database technology itself. So you're going to be, creating a database and working with Access to do that. Now, Access is just the front end to the database. So this really kind of starts with, hey, what is the overview? What are we actually working with? What are we learning? Why? And kind of why? Yeah, why? So Access has been around for a long time, and it's very popular for as a front end database tool. It's not the database. That's done by something else. So in fact, let's get on the whiteboard real quick so I can kind of give you what is it that we're actually working with. And then we'll dive into some of the PowerPoints. We're not going to do a deep dive, so don't worry. I've got a bunch of scribbles here. Okay, looks like they just kept all my scribbles. All right, my scribbles, I will do my best to have my scribbles be a little bit cognizant or viewable at least. So let's see. Something is going on here. All right, here we go. Uh, you have the access front end. That's the front end. That is what access is. It's just a program. It's a program that works with the database. Yeah, okay. The heck with it. I'm going. I'm going in a different direction. Okay, so access is the front end, and it works with the database on the back end. All right. So between these two things, the access your front end and which is, the point click forget. So it's where you click this and you click that and you do this and you do that. That's all just the front end to the actual database behind, which is the generic form of most databases. You're going to be working with databases that are cloud on the cloud. So it's actually the same thing as working on the cloud with a database, except for we're just using Access as the front end instead of a web browser. And that's the only difference. So a lot of what you're learning, point here, click this, click that, is going to be just so you can work with and understand the back end of the database. And well then, you're going to ask me, well, how do I work with the back end of the database? Well, Access provides you some direct input and it's pretty tightly coupled with the back end database. But the way you work with it is your front end program. It could be the web, it could be the access program, is a program in itself. It's its own executable. The database is on the back end and it's another program. It's not the same program. It's a whole nother executable. So you're actually working with two programs when you're dealing with when you're in Access. You're working with the Access front end that talks to the database on the back end. This works the same with websites. The website would be the front end instead of Access being the front end. Now, and then how does it talk? How do they talk to each other? How does one program talk to the second program? They do it with a language called SQL. SQL, and let's just throw that in Google. And you guys go ahead while you're here and just do what is SQL? What is SQL? SQL. We're gonna have AI come up with some goodies. Oh no, heck with it. Let's go right to W3 Schools. W3 Schools is a good resource. It really is. Practical examples and the ability to test them. But SQL is what's called the structured query language. So it's the language you use to give the back-end database instructions so that the front end can get data or send data to the back end, the database. And that's what structured query language is. So when things are happening on the back end, actually, excuse me, let's back up. The front end uses SQL to control, send data back and forth to the back end database. Now, for your purposes, anything theoretical and talks about databases and how they are structured, designed, and relate, that's all stuff that's done on the back end database. Now, how is it done? Using the structured query language with the control front end. Now, for your purposes, just treat them the same. Just treat them the same. It doesn't. It does. The distinction matters, but not in the place that you're at right now. So anything that is theory based is the back end, the actual database. Anything clicky instructions like click here, click this, click that, that's all the Access front end, and it's specific to just Access. Eventually, as you progress, you're going to be working with different front ends. Yes, different front ends than Access that connect to a database on the back end, another program running the database. And how do they talk? The structured query language. So you'll be building queries. You may see some queries as we progress, but you're not necessarily going to be doing a lot. There's going to be some there, but a lot of what you're going to be doing, just to get a feel for how that database in the back end works, is point, click here, and do this and do that. All right. Let's go back to a little bit on some database concepts. All right. We want to organize data, and how is that done? And it's done in the general format that everybody believes is the best format, which is as a database record or file or table, or series of related tables. So rows and columns. That's the way data is stored and worked with on a database. Now you can have tables that interact as well, and that's what we call relationships between tables. So a table is a record of fields that you're going to be using that represents rows and columns in the database. And the way the database handles rows and columns or records is in a table format, rows and columns. That's the way it's saved to disk, uh, and that's the standard form. Now a record can be just one row, or a record could be one column. You could have records that would be multiple rows or multiple columns, and data can be related between columns, rows, and tables. That's excuse me. That's the standard view of the best design for databases and how they work, or for storing data and kind of how it works. And we relate that data with rows, columns, and tables. One thing about a table that really is important, and I'm going to use this term relational database quite a bit, is that every record, and when we think of a record, we are traditionally thinking about rows. So when we just say record, we're talking about a row. Now, each row of data needs to have what we call a primary key. A primary key is some value given to a row of data or a record that sets it apart from any other piece of data in the record. So that means that Alex only has a patient ID, but there is only one patient ID assigned per individual. So that means each patient ID has to be unique. There cannot be, Sophia can't use Alex's ID. Clara can't use Alex's ID. So when we have data that we're grouping together, and we have multiple sets of the same type of data, we want to differentiate it with some kind of unique value within the data set. The value has to be unique per record. And then we can relate it, because things can't be all over the place. We've got to have something that we can count on in that table that is unique and sets that record apart from all other records. Because if it doesn't, then we start having data issues, and we don't want data issues. So primary keys are often automatically assigned in some instances, but whenever you create a table, you've got to make sure you create your primary key. And the primary key is that unique value given to a person. Now you can start that primary key at value 1000 and have it auto increment per record that you put in, so that you don't always have to enter patient ID. So auto increment and start it at a certain place is a good way of dealing with it when you work and design your tables. But yes, you're going to have some kind of primary key for each table. And that allows us to have records that are unique. Now, there's another part of that has kind of some other, I guess you would say, advantages, is that now when you have multiple tables, you can relate each table because the table has unique values. So you can have one table with unique values that you relate to another table with totally different unique values. But the data relates somehow. And you can put all the data together into one table from the relationship of two tables. So not only is the primary key necessary for a lot of, for unique values, unique records, data integrity, but it's also useful for when you go to relate, between two tables, because what you will do is you will add, when you create a new table, you will add a foreign key that goes right here that is the unique IDs of the second table that you're relating. So, and again, you're gonna be taking steps and reading more about it as you progress, with that hands-on as well from your book tutorials. Uh, so I know a lot of this vocab may be coming at you, but yes, the tables will relate with what's called a primary key in the initial table, and then the initial table, will may store the primary key of a whole nother table, connecting those two tables together. And multiple tables are what we call a database. One table is just a table, but multiple tables that relate together is what we call a database. All right, so that's kind of what we call a relational database management system. Now let's go back to that metaphor I started with. The front end, and this would be your DBMS. Did I do that right? Yeah, relational database management system. So you will have, a lot of what you're dealing with is just that back end program that represents the database itself. And that is multiple tables that come up and relate. And so that's kind of what we're working with. And let's see what else, I don't want to get too heavy into kind of the intro, because a lot of this understanding and learning is just plainly going through your book and doing the steps. So this is okay, yeah. So this right here talks about a query language. That's SQL. You will have some way of talking with that backend DBMS from the front end, and we already talked about that. So this is most we've already kind of covered a lot of this. This goes into starting access. You've got some good instructions on that, and actually, I just go access, and I think I have it. Yeah, type it in down here in search and start it up. And then you're going to have the ability to begin creating the database. Now, a lot of this is kind of giving you instructions on what you're doing and kind of some good ideas when you're creating tables. You want to use some kind of naming convention for your field names, and there's multiple ways of doing that. This one is called Camelback, where you do an uppercase on for each word, but the word describes the data itself. So we know that all the data that's in that column is called visit date. So we use a description to name our data, database fields with. And you may even prefix this with something like, what kind of database it is itself. You know, a lot of different prefixes, postfixes on this, but yeah, start well. Name your fields in this manner. You know, that's a good naming convention to use. Okay, what else do we got? You can rename your primary key field. Okay, so some instructions on that. I'm just looking at, you know, overview, adding new fields. This is all mostly your tutorial stuff, and nothing more kind of theory based. Okay, here we go. This is where you create a query. Now, remember we're talking about what is, you know, how do you talk to that backend database? It's through queries with SQL. You use the SQL language. So when you're given when given this information um, on how to do a SQL query, you're actually building the query itself, and you can look at the actual syntax of the code that's created. So you're using the query wizard that will write out the SQL code that happens based on what you do in this front end. And so you're actually creating a SQL query when you do this wizard that is a text-based thing. So let's look at what example SQL. Okay. So you can use the wizard to do some particular functions, or, you know, ask the, there we go, that's probably better. Ask the back end to do something. So like, here's an example. Select all asterisk from table customers where country equals Mexico. What that is the SQL statement, an example of what's being built behind the scenes of Access, because they're making things easy on you, so you don't have to come up with your own SQL strings. They've got a query that will build the SQL string for you, and then with a click of a button, run it on the back end DBMS. So this is what you are using the query for, and you can view that SQL statement that's generated for it. And what will end up happening is the result of that query will be a new table that is the data from that query itself. And the query could be, you know, hey, grab these records from this table, or insert this record into that table. That's the kind of instructions you have when you're working with SQL. Really, you know, the syntax can get, you know, if you haven't been introduced to like programming, it can be a little daunting, which is why we use the wizard. But just be kind of notice and understand that this wizard is Access specific. So what you're learning is just how to work with Access, not really how to work with every database out there in a lot of ways, unless you take note of the actual SQL statement that's generated. Okay, let's move on. I think, you know, I've really gotten to everything that let's go. Is there anything more overview? No, there isn't. Here, backup, yes, back up your stuff. We already talked about that. All right, managing a database, okay, backing it up. You know, every week keep your file separate for every week. Use the previous week's file for the next week. All right, That's my overview for this initial chapter for you. Uh, Thanks for, yeah.